The thing most people don't understand about working deep-sea rescue is how boring it is. 99% of your time is spent waiting. You're sitting in a steel room that smells like diesel and recycled air, playing cards with people you've known so long their stories have become your stories, drinking coffee that tastes like it was brewed in a radiator, watching instruments that almost never move. You do this for weeks, months sometimes, and then a signal comes in, and everything you are compresses into a single point of focus, and you become the most alert version of yourself, and you do your job, and either someone lives or they don't. And then you go back to the steel room and the bad coffee and the waiting. I loved it. I loved the rhythm. I loved the boredom because it meant nothing was wrong. I loved the crew because they were the kind of people who ran toward danger instead of away from it. And there's a specific warmth in being surrounded by those people. You feel safe. You feel like the world has edges, and you know where they are. My name is Elliot Marsh. I was a deep water rescue diver attached to the DSV Cormorant, a research and recovery vessel operating in the Northeast Atlantic. Our team consisted of 4 divers and a support crew of 12. The divers were me, Reyes, Kowalski, and Dr. Lena Hargrove, who everyone called Doc. Reyes was our team leader, 41, former Navy, the kind of man who could assess a crisis in the time it takes most people to register that a crisis exists. Kowalski was the youngest, at 28, built like a fire hydrant, talked too much on comms, laughed at his own jokes, and was the best technical diver I'd ever worked with. Doc wasn't technically a rescue diver. She was a marine acoustician, a specialist in deep ocean sound propagation. She'd been embedded with us for 3 months to study communication patterns in abyssal fauna. She dove with us when the science required it, but she wasn't operational. She was there to listen. It was Doc who heard it first. 3 weeks into what had been an unremarkable deployment in the mid-Atlantic, somewhere between the Azores and the Canary Islands, Doc walked into the mess at 2 a.m. with her laptop open and her face the color of old paper. She set the computer on the table without a word and pressed play. Static, the hiss and crackle of deep water hydrophone recordings. Then, beneath it, something else. A voice. Faint.
I descended through the blue-green glow with my arms at my sides and my eyes open and my calm playing the sounds of my own disintegration. The sounds I'd been hearing for hours. The sounds the entity had been broadcasting since before I was born, reaching backward through time like a hand extended from the dark, patient, certain, waiting for the moment when I would finally reach out and take it. At 300 meters, my suit began to creak. At 600, my visor cracked and a thread of water found my cheek, ice cold against skin that was already beginning to feel like it belonged to someone else. At 900, the walls of the cavity came into view, glistening, pulsing, lined with cilia that waved in greeting. And I understood with absolute clarity that I had been here before, that I was always here, that the version of me sitting on the cormorant hearing the signal for the first time, and the version of me sinking into the organ's embrace were the same version, separated by nothing, connected by a loop of water and sound and time that had no beginning and no end. The membranes opened. My mouth opened with them. And the sound that came out of my throat was the sound that had lured me here. My voice. My scream. Traveling backward through 1,100 meters of black water and 47 minutes of linear time to find my own ears in a control room on a ship that no longer existed in any reference frame that mattered. The lure was me. It was always me. Not mimicked, not replicated. Produced in real time, by the lungs and larynx and desperate failing vocal cords of a man who was dying right now, and had been dying since the moment he first heard himself die. The signal isn't coming from the deep. The signal is the deep. And you have been listening to it for the last 20 minutes. Sitting in your room, in your car, in the dark, with your headphones on, leaning closer, turning up the volume, letting the frequency settle into your bones the same way it settled into mine. You heard a voice in distress, and you stayed. You listened. You followed the sound deeper. That is how it feeds. If you're hearing this, like and subscribe. And if you ever pick up a distress signal from a depth that nothing human could survive, you cut the feed. You turn the ship around. And you do not, under any circumstances, listen long enough for the voice to learn your name.
Warped by distance and pressure and the strange acoustics of the deep ocean, but unmistakably human, and unmistakably saying the same 3 words over and over. Please help us. The mess went silent. Reyes set his coffee down. Kowalski stopped chewing. Where is this coming from? Reyes asked. Doc swallowed. The hydrophone array picked it up 40 minutes ago. Bearing 217. The source depth is... She paused, as if saying the number would make it more real. Approximately 1,100 meters. Nobody spoke for a long time. 1,100 meters. The midnight zone. The layer of ocean where sunlight doesn't reach, where the pressure would crush an unprotected human body like a fist closing around a grape, where the water temperature hovers just above freezing, and the only light comes from the organisms that make their own. Nothing human operates at 1,100 meters. No submersible in our fleet, no dive system we possessed, no technology on the Cormorant was rated for that depth. That's impossible, Kowalski said. Play it again, Reyes said. Doc played it again. The voice was clearer the second time. Or maybe our brains were filling in the gaps, assembling coherence from noise the way we're wired to do. Please help us. 3 words, repeated at intervals of approximately 8 seconds. The same cadence, the same pitch, the same desperate, drowning urgency. Is that a recording? I asked. Could it be a black box, a downed aircraft? Doc shook her head. No ping, no EPRB signature, no accompanying beacon of any kind. This isn't electronic. The waveform is... it's organic. Organic, Reyes repeated. The frequency profile doesn't match any transmitter I've cataloged. It matches a human larynx. Someone, or something, is producing this sound biologically. At 1,100 meters, I said. At 1,100 meters, she confirmed. Reyes stood and left the room. 10 minutes later, the Cormorant changed course. We spent the next 14 hours closing the distance. The signal didn't stop. Every 40 minutes, Doc would play the latest recording over the mess speakers. Each time, the voice was slightly louder, slightly clearer, as if we were being drawn toward it on a string. At hour 6, the voice changed. Please help us became, we're running out of air. The sentence structure was more complex. The desperation had escalated. There was a wetness to the consonants now, a thickness, as if the speaker's mouth was filling with fluid between words. Kowalski stopped joking.
He sat in the dive prep room, running equipment checks with a focus I'd never seen from him. His hands were steady, but his jaw was locked. Reyes moved through the ship with quiet efficiency, speaking in low tones to the captain, reviewing dive protocols that were designed for 600 meters and trying to figure out how to stretch them to nearly double. I found Doc in the acoustics lab. She was wearing headphones, eyes closed, fingers pressing the cups against her ears as if trying to push the sound deeper into her skull. "There's something else in the recording," she said without opening her eyes. "Under the voice, a secondary frequency, extremely low, below the threshold of human hearing. Infrasound, lower. I had to pitch shift it up 12 octaves just to make it audible." She unplugged the headphones and let the speakers carry it. At first, I heard nothing. Then, at the edge of perception, a rhythm, not a heartbeat, not mechanical, something between the two. A slow, wet undulation, like an enormous muscle contracting and relaxing in the dark. It rose and fell with a patience that suggested something alive and something vast and something very, very old. "What is that?" I whispered. Doc opened her eyes. They were bloodshot, and there was something in them I hadn't seen before. Not fear exactly. Awe. The kind of awe that sits right next to terror, separated by a membrane thin enough to see through. "I think it's breathing," she said. We reached the coordinates at dusk. The sky was a bruise of purple and orange, and the sea was calm in a way that felt deliberate, as if the water was holding itself still. The signal was directly below us, 1,140 meters according to the latest triangulation. The Cormorant didn't have the equipment to reach that depth with divers, but we had the ROV, a remotely operated vehicle rated to 2,000 meters, equipped with cameras, lights, and a manipulator arm. It wasn't designed for rescue. It was designed for observation, but observation was all we could offer. Reyes, Doc, Kowalski, and I crowded into the ROV control room as the technician, a quiet man named Fenn, lowered the unit over the side. The monitor showed the familiar transition. Surface chop, green water, deeper blue. Then the blue bled out, and there was only black. And the ROV's lights carved a cone of visibility that extended maybe 15 meters into a darkness so total it seemed to have texture. Numbers ticked on the depth gauge. 200. 300. 400. At 500 meters, the first organisms appeared. Jellyfish trailing luminescent filaments. A lanternfish, eyes enormous, reflecting the ROV's lights like tiny mirrors. The occasional flash of bioluminescence in the distance, blue-green sparks firing and dying in the void, like neurons in a brain too large to comprehend. At 700 meters, the water changed. I don't know how else to describe it. The quality of the darkness shifted. It became denser, more present, as if the ROV were descending not through water, but through something with intention. The lights seemed to reach less far. The cone of visibility shrank. I told myself it was particulate matter, sediment, biological debris, but it felt like the darkness was pushing back. At 900 meters, Doc stiffened. "The signal just changed again," she said, adjusting her headphones. She patched it through the room speakers. The voice was close now, close and terrible. It wasn't saying, "Please help us" anymore. It was saying names: Reyes, Kowalski, Elliot, Lena. Our names, in that same drowning voice, spoken with a familiarity that implied not just knowledge but intimacy, as if the speaker had lived inside our mouths and learned how our tongues shaped each syllable.
Kowalski stood up so fast his chair hit the wall. "Turn it off," he said. Nobody moved. "Turn the fuck off." Reyes reached over and muted the speakers. The silence that followed was worse, because the silence wasn't really silence. Through the steel hull of the cormorant, through 600 meters of ocean, I could still feel it. That infrasonic pulse, that vast, wet breathing. Slower now, patient. The ROV continued its descent. At 1,000 meters, the camera caught something that made Fen pull his hands away from the controls. The seafloor wasn't where it should be. At this depth, in this region, charts showed a relatively flat abyssal plain. Instead, the ROV's lights revealed a slope, a smooth, curved surface descending at an angle that steepened as the lights tracked downward. Not rock, not sediment. The surface was dark, almost black, with a faint iridescent sheen that shifted when the lights moved. And it was textured, covered in ridges, parallel grooves running in concentric patterns, tightening toward a center point below. Doc leaned forward until her face was inches from the monitor. "Those ridges, they're not geological." "What are they?" Reyes asked. "They look like papillae."
"Taste buds, scaled up by a factor of..." She trailed off. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. The ROV descended along the slope. The ridges grew larger. At their base, between the grooves, I could see movement. Cilia, millions of them, fine as hair, waving in unison in a current that wasn't there. The motion was hypnotic, rhythmic, synchronized with the infrasonic pulse we'd been hearing for hours. At 1,100 meters, the slope curved inward, and the ROV entered a cavity. The space opened up around the camera like the interior of a cathedral. The walls were organic, glistening, ribbed with structures that pulsed with a slow, muscular rhythm. The ROV's lights caught veins, or what looked like veins, dark channels running through the tissue, carrying something that wasn't blood, but moved like blood. The temperature reading on the ROV's instruments climbed. The water inside this space was warmer, much warmer, as if the cavity itself was generating heat through metabolic processes that predated multicellular life. And in the center of the cavity, suspended in the warm, dark water, was the source of the signal. Not a person, not a machine, not anything I had a word for. It was an organ. That's the closest I can get. A structure roughly spherical, maybe 2 meters in diameter, attached to the cavity wall by a thick, pulsing stalk. Its surface was covered in thousands of small, membranous openings that flexed and contracted in sequence, and from each opening came sound. Not the same sound. Each membrane produced a different frequency, a different tone, a different word. Together, in concert, they assembled language the way an orchestra assembles music, and the language they were assembling was ours. Please help us. We're running out of air. Reyes, Kowalski, Elliot, Lena. The organ was speaking with human voices, not one voice, dozens, layered. Some screaming, some whispering, some just breathing, wet and ragged and failing. And every single one of them was familiar in a way that made my teeth ache. Familiar the way your own recorded voice is familiar. Close, but wrong. You, but not you. It's a lure, Doc, whispered. Like an anglerfish. It produces the signal to attract prey. The distress call isn't a call for help. It's a hunting strategy. Reyes reached for the comm. Then, bring it up. Now. Fenn's hands were already on the controls. The ROV began to ascend. On screen, the cavity walls pulsed faster. The cilia waved with sudden urgency.
The organ's membranes opened wider, and the voices screamed. Then the feed cut to black. Static. 10 seconds. 20. Fenn worked the controls, cycling through frequencies, rebooting systems. Nothing. Then the feed returned. But the image wasn't from the ROV, it was from inside the cormorant. We were looking at ourselves.
the four of us and Fen, captured from an angle that didn't correspond to any camera on the ship. The image was oversaturated, colors bleeding, as if the light source was wrong, and we were moving. In the image, we were putting on dive gear, full deep water rigs, helmets, umbilicals, the heavy suits rated for saturation diving, equipment we hadn't touched because we had no reason to touch it. The depth was beyond dive limits. There was no mission that required us to enter the water. But in the image, we were suiting up with the mechanical efficiency of a team that had been given orders. Our faces were calm. Our movements were practiced. Kowalski was checking his helmet seal. I was clipping my bailout bottle. Doc was fitting her comm unit. Reyes was standing at the dive platform, looking down into the water with an expression I can only describe as resigned acceptance. "What the hell is this?" Kowalski said, but his voice was thin, stripped of force. The image changed. Now we were in the water, descending, helmet lights cutting white tunnels through the black. I could see our depth gauges climbing, 300, 500, 700, depths that would kill us, depths our equipment wasn't designed to reach. But we kept going, sinking into the midnight zone with the steady, unhurried pace of people who had already made peace with what was coming. At 1100 meters, the image showed us entering the cavity. The organ waited, pulsing, its membranes wide open. And then the image showed something I need to describe very carefully because it's the thing I see every time I close my eyes. Our bodies came apart. Not violently, not explosively. The pressure didn't crush us. The water didn't drown us. We simply disassembled, layer by layer, suit first, peeling away like dead skin, then the thermal undergarments, then our actual skin, lifting from muscle in translucent sheets that drifted upward and were caught by the cilia and drawn toward the cavity walls. Then muscle from bone, unraveling in long red ribbons. Then bone itself, dissolving into a calcium cloud that the organ inhaled through its membranes.
And during the entire process, we were conscious. I could see my own face in the image. My eyes were open. My mouth was moving. I was speaking. And the words I was speaking were the words the organ had been broadcasting. Please help us. My voice. My exact voice. Not mimicked. Not approximated. Mine. Produced by my own disintegrating larynx as my throat unwound fiber by fiber into the warm, dark water. The image froze. Then the screen went black. The control room was silent, except for the sound of someone hyperventilating. It was me. I was the one hyperventilating. That was us, Kowalski said. He said it flatly, without inflection, the way you state a mathematical fact. That was us dying. It hasn't happened, Reyes said. We're here. We're on the ship. We're not in the water. Yet, Doc said. The word landed like an anchor. We pulled the ROV cable. It came up empty. The unit was gone, severed cleanly at 800 meters, the cable end smooth and warm to the touch. Reyes ordered the cormoran to move, full speed, any direction, away. The engines engaged. The ship didn't move. I went topside. The ocean was flat, perfectly, impossibly flat. No waves, no swell, no wind. The surface of the water had the quality of glass, and below that glass, very far down, a faint bioluminescent glow pulsed in time with the infrasonic rhythm that now resonated through the hull of the ship. The signal was still broadcasting. Doc had stopped trying to turn off the speakers. It played throughout the ship, every room, every corridor, a chorus of our own voices begging for rescue from a death that hadn't happened yet. Reyes, please, my suit is breaching. I can feel the water. Reyes. That was Kowalski's voice, the future version of Kowalski.
the one in the image, the one whose skin peeled away in sheets. The real Kowalski was standing next to me on the deck, listening to himself die, and the sound coming out of the speakers matched his voice so precisely that when he spoke over it, trying to drown it out, the two voices harmonized. "It's not real," he kept saying. "It's not real, it's not real, it's not... Elliot, don't look down. Don't look at your hands, Elliot. Your hands." That was my voice. I heard my own death narrated by my own future throat. I heard myself describe the sensation of my fingers separating at the joints. I heard the panic.
I heard the specific, unique quality of my scream, the one I'd never heard because I'd never screamed like that, and I recognized it, the way you recognize your reflection in a mirror you've never stood in front of. Instantly. Absolutely. Doc was in the acoustics lab. She had locked the door. Through it, I could hear her speaking rapidly into a recorder, documenting everything in the clinical vocabulary of a scientist who had realized she was no longer studying a phenomenon, but had become part of one. "The entity operates outside of linear time," she said. "The signal we detected is not a recording of past events. It is a transmission from a future that the entity has already experienced. It exists in the moment of our deaths, and it broadcasts backward to draw us to the location where those deaths occur. The lure is perfect because it is not a fabrication. It is genuine human distress, our distress, occurring in a temporal frame we have not yet entered but cannot avoid." She paused. I heard her breathing, fast and shallow, losing its clinical rhythm. "The midnight zone is not a geographic depth," she continued. "It is the event horizon of the entity's feeding mechanism. The cavity we observed is not an organ of mimicry. It is a digestive system that operates across time. It consumes us at the moment of death and broadcasts the byproduct of that consumption, our agony, backward through the water column to ensure that we arrive at the moment of death. The loop is closed. It has always been closed." Another pause. Longer. "We cannot leave because we have already arrived. The decision to dive has already been made, not by us, by the version of us that exists inside the loop, the version that is already dying, the version whose voices we've been listening to for..." She stopped. The recorder clicked off. Then her voice joined the broadcast. "Doc, no. Lena, your face. Your face is... Please, someone." I pounded on the lab door. It opened. The room was empty. Her headphones sat on the desk, still plugged in, still playing. Her chair was warm. The air smelled like salt water that had traveled a very long distance from a very deep place. On the desk, next to her recorder, was a printout, a spectrographic analysis of the broadcast signal. She had isolated and labeled each voice: Reyes, Kowalski, Elliot, Lena, and beneath each name, a timestamp. Not past, future. The timestamps were 47 minutes from now. I found Reyes on the dive platform. He was wearing his suit. Reyes. He looked at me. His eyes were clear, calm. The eyes of a man who had assessed a crisis and determined that the crisis was unsolvable, and had moved directly to acceptance without passing through any of the stages in between. "I can hear it in the walls," he said. "The breathing. It's been breathing since before we got here. Since before we were born. It's been waiting for this specific moment since before human beings existed. We're not the first. We won't be the last. Take off the suit. You'll put yours on in about 20 minutes. You won't decide to. Your hands will do it. Your body already knows it has somewhere to be. Reyes, listen." I listened. Through the deck, through the steel, through the water, the infrasonic pulse had changed. It was faster, closer, no longer just audible as vibration, but as something I could feel in my chest, in my marrow, in the spaces between my cells. My body was resonating with it, harmonizing, and as the frequency rose, I felt my hands begin to move. They reached for the suit rack.
I watched them do it. I watched my own fingers close around the neoprene. I watched myself step into the legs, pull the torso over my shoulders, reach for the zipper. I was screaming inside my skull, but my face was calm, and my hands were steady, and my body moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times. Kowalski appeared on the platform, already suited, his face blank, his eyes focused on the water. The surface had begun to glow. Deep below the glass-flat ocean, the bioluminescence was rising, a pale blue-green radiance climbing from 1,100 meters, filling the water column with light that shouldn't exist. Light generated by an organism so large that its glow illuminated the underside of our hull like a second sun rising from beneath the world. My helmet sealed with a click. The comm crackled. Doc's voice, but not from the speakers. From below. From the water. From the future. It doesn't hurt at first. That's the worst part. You feel warm. You feel like you're coming home. And then the warmth becomes heat. And the heat becomes static. I stepped off the platform. The water closed over my head. And it was warm. And it was welcoming. And it was the temperature of the inside of something alive. I sank. I didn't kick. I didn't fight.